So in paper 3, we asked what can be done and what has been done to decrease gender inequality, loosen these restrictive gender norms, and improve the health and well-being of our communities. And we did that by looking at different types of key interventions, key ways to intervene. So first, we considered the influence of health programming. And to do that, we scoured the literature. We looked at the gray literature, peer-reviewed literature, for specifically what we called gender transformative programs. And by this I mean programs that actively seek to transform norms in order to improve health. So we looked for rigorously evaluated gender transformative programs in any part of the world, among any target population, regardless of age, sex, race, etc., and programs that influence any type of health outcomes. So as you can imagine, this is a very broad literature search. And in fact, it's one of a kind. No one has done something so broad. And what we found, we found 85 gender transformative programs that met our search criteria.
85 is very impressive.
It is impressive. It is impressive. And in fact, it shows that over the past couple of decades, our field, the health field, is starting to take a more gender-aware approach. However, it's important to note that 90% of those 85 programs were focused on health outcomes related to HIV, sexual and reproductive health, and violence. And that's not really surprising given our field, but there are some implications there. We've just heard that gender does influence many health outcomes beyond those that I just mentioned. And given our shift in the global burden of disease, there's some potential to do broader programming. But I digress. We wanted to see if these 85 programs actually transform norms as they sought to do. And so what we did is we looked at a few elements, key elements of norm change. So the first were multiplicative effects. Do these programs have effects on health outcomes beyond the health outcomes that they initially set out to do? And in fact, we found 48% showed multiplicative effect. We also wanted to look at evidence of spread. So do the messaging and the interventions, did they spread beyond the target population that was initially targeted? And in fact, we found evidence among 48% of programs of spread. But we also, if we're going to see gender norm change, we want to see sustained health outcomes. And we found that in fact, 40% of the programs had health outcomes sustained a year after that program was ended. So that was great, good sustainability. And then finally, we wanted to look at, were these programs being taken to scale, or did they have the potential for scale up? And we found that 38% did. But if we look across these four elements, in fact, only 16, so 20% of the programs showed all four of these elements. And so those 16 programs we consider to be high quality gender transformative programming. In other words, they showed evidence of or potential for actual gender norm change. And so we said, okay, among these 16, what are key elements that go across all of them? And we found four. So one is multi-sectoral action. And by that I mean the programs, they realized that in order to get real health outcomes, they had to go outside of the health sector and engage other sectors such as religion, education, and so forth. We also found diversified programming. So these 16 programs implemented interventions that were strategically done so that they incorporated a wide range of activities and hit a number of different people. And then third, we saw that these programs did multi-sectoral and multi-level stakeholder involvement. And then finally, we saw that these programs engage their communities and engage their participants so that the participants themselves played an active role and were agents of change of their own in their own change.
In addition to programs, we also looked at the role of laws and policies. With gender inequalities being all pervasive and widespread, governments can adopt laws and policies at a national scale and can bring about massive change. Let me explain why we thought laws and policies could have an impact. When gender norms are skewed, as reflected, for instance, by the unequal distribution of decision-making power in households, laws and policies that reduce gender disparities in educational opportunities, work opportunities, and other opportunities, that can lead to a balancing of the power imbalances through several mechanisms, such as increased labor force participation of women, greater equal division of household responsibilities, and many more. And two such examples are tuition-free primary education policies and paid maternity and parental leave policies. The question that should be asked is whether there is actually any evidence to show that these policies actually work. Do they do what we think they should be doing? To answer this question, we compared women before and after such policies were adopted in certain countries and contrasted them with women in countries that did not have similar policies. What we found was these two policies, tuition-free primary education and approximately 10-week increase in paid maternity and parental leave, led to an increased likelihood of women being more engaged in household decision-making by 45%.
45%?
Yes. Wait, there is more. We also found that these two policies increased health outcomes of women, improved health outcomes of women and their children, including family planning practices, a presence of skilled attendant and childbirth, and child immunization. And depending on the outcome and the policy that you were looking at, the increased likelihoods range from about 15% to 110%. More importantly and innovatively though, we found that these improvements that you see in health outcomes were partially caused by the improvements in gender norms that followed the policy change. In other words, the policies had a direct and positive effect on health, as well as an indirect effect that occurred because of improved gender norms. Now, of course, there can be several other gender transformative policies. And what we found is that reducing gender disparities, increasing equality in education and work, actually increases the life expectancy of men as well as of women. That's great evidence, right? But whenever we talk of laws and policies, there is always the question: implementation, monitoring, political will. Not surprisingly, there is evidence that shows if we increase gender equality in political participation, that supports greater gender transformative interventions that then results in reduction of gender gaps across a variety of dimensions.
So in this paper, we saw that gender transformative programming, laws and policies taken to scale, and actions related to governance do have the potential to transform norms. So we need to be investing in these programs, and we need to be doing it now. So do you want to?
Okay. So next we have paper 4 being presented by